How's it going, everybody? Today I got a quick video on how to make a Chinese pork stir fry. Now this is a variation on a recipe you might have heard of called hui guo rou, otherwise known as double cooked pork. Double cooked pork is mostly associated with Sichuan cuisine, but actually it's just a pretty common way of cooking pork throughout China, where you boil it, slice it thin, and then stir fry it. Sometimes it's stir fried with peppers, sometimes with cabbage, sometimes with leeks, sometimes with all of the above, sometimes with dried tofu, sometimes without tofu, so it really just depends on whatever you have in your kitchen. The method is exactly the same. For this recipe, we're gonna stir fry our pork with some long green and red chilies, some leeks, and some dried tofu. For the peppers, any long green or red chili will do the trick. Just depends on your spice tolerance. I personally like peppers that aren't of the bell pepper variety because I think that bell peppers have just a little bit too strong of a flavor for this dish. Something long and green like a banana pepper or even a jalapeno, if you can handle it, would probably be more appropriate. For the leeks, any size will do. If you want big leeks, if you can find them, or just oversized green onions, or just small green onions, it doesn't really matter, but just something to get that oniony flavor. You don't want to use regular yellow onions because they get a little bit too sweet. Those weird brown squares are actually dried tofu with 5 spice flavorings. You can probably get them at your Asian market. They don't have to look exactly like this or be this color, but any sort of dried tofu should do the trick, as long as you can slice it thin and stir fry it. You don't want the just the regular hard tofu that comes in the box. You want it dried and pressed, so it's like actually pretty hard to the touch. And then we got some garlic and ginger, pretty straightforward. Now for this recipe, our main flavoring is going to come from this sauce called doubanjiang, which is often translated as chili bean sauce or broad bean paste or chili bean paste even. It's typically made with fermented broad beans or fava beans and is known especially in the Sichuan province. The stuff that I have is actually from Sichuan, so I know it's the good stuff. As for more generic brands, I'm pretty sure in the US at least, the Lei Kum Kei is probably the easiest to get your hands on. And this is not a recommendation, this is just a guess that this brand will be the easiest to get your hands on, either online or at your local Asian market. What you really want is the stuff that comes in this plastic tub looking thing, and you get a whole lot of it at once, and that's the real stuff from Sichuan. Not too many companies export it, so it's not too easy to get your hands on, but if you can, do it. One thing to watch out for with the more generic brands is that they might be made with soybeans instead of broad beans. This isn't disastrous. If it's all you can find, then use it by all means, but what you really want to do is check the label and make sure they have broad beans as the first ingredient and not soybeans. And finally, we got our boiled piece of pork belly, which is the most important part of the dish. Obviously, that's why it's called double cooked pork. And I'm going to show you how to boil it with a few extra spices just to give it a little bit of extra flavor. This step is unnecessary. You could just boil it plain if you like, but I like just adding a few extra touches to just kick it up a notch. Now for boiling the pork, all you're going to need is a piece of pork belly, some garlic, some ginger, got some salt right there, a couple Sichuan peppercorns, and some 5 spice powder. Now 2 other ingredients that I forgot to include are Chinese cooking wine and white peppercorns. And we're just going to take all that, put that in a pot, and let it boil for about 30 minutes. And after about 30 minutes, we're going to take our pork belly out of the pot and put it on a plate to cool. At this point, our pork needs to chill in the fridge for at least a couple hours, and I would actually recommend doing this step a day or 2 in advance, because the longer it spends in the refrigerator, the easier it'll be to slice, the more the flavors will kind of marry with each other, and also it'll have a chewier texture as it kind of dries out a bit. I know that sounds a little weird, but the pork will taste better if it's just a little bit drier before you stir fry it. And for our next step, we just want to chop our vegetables. I'm chopping the leeks into 2 to 3 inch long pieces. And I'm chopping the long peppers on an angle about 1/2 inch wide. Next you want to slice your dry tofu about as thin as you can. And do the same for your pork, which should be thoroughly chilled. With all of our ingredients chopped and ready, we can begin stir-frying them on a medium-high heat. I've added in a tablespoon or two of refined coconut oil, but any neutral cooking oil will do the trick. The first thing to go in is the pork. And we're going to fry them in the pan until they get a little bit golden and crispy. You want to constantly keep them moving, because if they sit on the pan flat, they'll start popping, and you'll get splattered in oil. So don't do that. And when they're good and crispy, they come out. And the tofu slices go in the same oil. And you want to do roughly the same thing, just cook them until they're a little bit crispy. When they get to that point, you can then add in your flavorings, the doubanjiang, your garlic, and your ginger, and just mix it all together. Once those ingredients are thoroughly mixed, add in your peppers, and just cook them until they're to your liking. I've had it before where the peppers were barely cooked, and I've had it before where they were pretty well done, so it's all up to you. And finally, do the same thing for the leeks. Just add them in and cook them till they're to your liking. And finally, you add back in the pork. Keep tossing them around. Make sure all the flavors are even. And that's about it. Then plate and serve. And that's how you make crispy, savory, double-cooked pork.